Hello everybody. So now we'll continue the lecture on fertility. Previously we saw an introduction about fertility, including conceptualization and measurement of fertility. And then I went through the framework for predicting fertility, including the approximate determinants of fertility. And afterwards we follow through showing some general world fertility trends and patterns that are going on in more recent years. So now we will talk about fertility change in the US, focusing on adolescent fertility, also changes in non-marital fertility, and childlessness. And then in the next lecture, we're going to talk specific about male fertility. So fertility change in the US, we go further to slide 43. So let's just go there. So here's the framework for predicting fertility. And the framework for approximate determinants of fertility that we discussed before. So on slide 43, fertility changes in the US, we have seen in these last centuries a rapid decrease of the total fertility rate from 7 to under 4 children per woman. So this drop from 7 to 4 happened between 1800 and 1900. And in the early 20th century, we have seen a sustained fertility decline, and that's usually related to the rapid economic transition, industrialization, and urbanization in the country. The decline in TFR is nowadays around 2 children per woman, and so it dropped to only 2 in more recent years after reaching 3.7 in the late 1950s, and then it went down to 2 children per woman. So the rate of natural increase, and we saw that the rate of natural increase is calculated as the subtraction of the crude birth rate minus the crude death rate. In 2014 in the US, it equaled 0.4%, so overall we have more births than deaths in the country. And this 0.4% is actually the highest rate of natural increase of any developed country. And another important factor that's going on in the US is that the country is passing through an aging population as a whole. So although you still have more births than deaths in the country, you also have a process in which the country has been experiencing a higher proportion of people in older ages. In terms of adolescent fertility, here we are talking about the age-specific fertility rate for women between 15 and 19 years of age. And why do we pay attention specifically for this group of women between 15 and 19? Because whether women have children in such young ages, they can have potential impacts on their life later on. So we want to understand the potential impacts of early childbearing on women, and usually women who have children at such young ages, they tend to have overall more births throughout their childbearing years. So they usually tend to have higher parity, more children than other women if they start having children in younger ages. And they also tend to end school earlier on, so they tend to even drop out from high school and don't go into college education. And because of that, because of having overall more children than other women on average and tending to drop out early from school, so they tend to have losses in economic potential, because they will have they will get worse jobs and jobs with lower paying salaries than other women. And related to all that, lower education, lower earnings in their jobs, that tend to affect their health in a negative way. So, and that affect the health of their children as well. So just to have an idea, the adolescent fertility rate between 2005 and 2010 in the world, it was of 48.9 children per 1,000 women between 15 and 19 years of age. In developed countries, it was 23.6 children per 1,000 women, and it varied a lot between developed countries. So in Switzerland, it was only 4.5 per 1,000 women between 15 and 19, and in the US was 39.7, in Bulgaria 42.1. And in developing countries, on average, of course, it's higher than developed countries. And here we see this graph where we see this variation of the adolescent birth rates in the world, in developing countries, in developed countries, and also across different areas in the world. And you see that in African countries, you have higher adolescent birth rates than in other areas in the world. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we are in between the other areas in the world, and Oceania and Europe, they have the lowest adolescent birth rates. So the specific case of the US, the adolescent fertility rate has been experiencing a decline since the 1940s, and that's usually it's related to to increases in contraception use among women between 15 and 19 years of age. And so among teenagers, there was a significant increase in the percentage of births to unmarried teenagers. So you see overall a decline in adolescent fertility in the US since the 1940s, but those teenagers that have children, they tend to not be married. So among those teenagers that had children in 1940, 14% of them only were not married. And now in 2000, in more recent years, in 2013, 89% of those teenagers in the US who had children, they were not married. And the fertility of younger teenagers compared to older teenagers is also interesting to compare. In more recent years, we have this data to compare between those two specific groups of those between 15 and 17 and those between 18 and 19. And you see that for younger teenagers, the rates are much lower than older teenagers between 18 and 19. So 12.3 per 1,000 women between 15 and 17 years of age, and 47.3 per 1,000 women between 18 and 19 years of age. And so you see variations in teenage fertility rates by age among teenagers, and also you see differentials by race ethnicity. And you see that using data from 2014, Asian and Pacific Islander teenagers, they had around 7.7 children per 1,000 women, and Hispanic teenagers, they had around 38 children per 1,000 Hispanic adolescents. And in terms of the differentials by age, as we saw before, we see that the rates are higher overall for older teenagers comparing to younger teenagers. And the differentials, they have been kind of stable over time. And the variation that you see over time, it kind of, it's pretty much like similar among these two age groups. So, but you see that now in more recent years, like around the end of the 2000s, you see deeper, like a more steep decline on birth rate for teenagers, both of those around between 18 and 19 years of age, and those between 15 and 17. And in terms of differentials by race ethnicity, you see, I mean, we saw in the previous slide data only for 2014 for Hispanic, almost like 40 children per 1,000 women between 15 and 19. And Asian Pacific Islanders, they were 7.7 per 1,000 women. So, but overall, these teenagers, they have been declining their fertility over time from 1991 to 2007, 2013, and 2014. And that has been also been experienced for non-Hispanic Black teenagers, American Indians or Alaskan Natives, non-Hispanic whites, and also Asian or Pacific Islanders. But also the differentials by race ethnicity, they still remain a reality in the country, with Hispanic teenagers have much higher rates than non-Hispanic white in Asian or Pacific Islanders, for example. In terms of non-marital fertility, this is the fertility of women who are not married or those who are widowed or divorced. And in the past, it used to be called illegitimate fertility, but now, because of cultural changes, it's much more accepted for women to have children when they're not married and they're widowed or divorced. So this term is not used anymore nowadays. And it's important to understand fertility by marital status of women, because marital status is a marker of financial, social, emotional resources. So it marks a stage on their life that's important for us to understand how the rates of fertility vary by marital status. So in 2013, there were 41% of non-marital births out of the total number of all births. And that's a gradual increase since the 1940s, when it was very low. It was only 4% of non-marital births out of the total number of all births in the country. And again, we see differentials of non-marital fertility by race ethnicity. For Asians, they have the lowest rates, only 17 of all Asian births are non-marital births. And among African Americans, they experience the highest non-marital births by race ethnicity. And it's also important to highlight that non-marital births also include births to women in cohabiting unions and unmarried women not cohabiting. So here we have the number of births, the birth rate and percentage of births to unmarried women in the US between 1940 and 2013. Overall, we have an increase in the number of births. That's the numerator of the formula. That's because we have more women who are unmarried nowadays. So overall, they have more children in absolute number. But overall, the birth rates to unmarried women has also been increasing over time. And the percentage of births to unmarried women also has been increasing over time. So here on the right vertical axis, we have the births in thousands related to the light blue line. And on the left vertical axis, we have the percent unmarried women, which is the green line, and the births per 1,000 unmarried women aged 15 to 44, which is the dark blue line. And now, talking about childlessness, women having no children voluntarily or involuntarily, actually we have been seeing that there is an increase in women who don't want to have children at all during their life. And voluntarily childlessness almost non-existed between the 1950s and 1960s, and we have been seeing an increase in childlessness in the US since the 1970s. And this is mainly due to women who don't want to have children at all because for voluntary reasons, not for involuntary causes. And this is due to attitudes and norms toward childlessness becoming more positive overall with with changes in gender norms. Women investing more in their education and enter the labor market. That's all related to an increase in childlessness in the country. Just to see some of these trends, this graph shows the percentage rates of childlessness for women between 30 and 44 years of age between 1976 and 2012. And of course, younger women, they have higher rates of not having children at all, but maybe these women who are 30 to 34, later as they get older, they might tend to have children when they reach 35 to 39 or 40 to 44, and even in older ages. But you kind of see, even within those who are 30 to 34, you see an increase in the percentage of those that don't have children. And the same thing for those 35 to 39 and 40 to 44. But then it became kind of stable by like beginning of the 90s until around 2005, 2008. And then you see an increase on percentage rates of women don't having children exactly after the economic recession that you saw in the US after 2008, and maybe now in more recent years that you have better economic prospects for women, you start to see women starting to have more children, then the rates of childlessness, they drop again. So we saw now the major trends in fertility among US women in more recent years. And in the next lecture, we're going to talk about male fertility. Thank you very much.